Alright, now we're going to start adding some color, and we practiced wet on wet technique before, and we're going to use that to start our feathers as well. This time we're using it on the inside, so I'm going to skip this part that goes down the center. I'm only getting the parts wet that are inside the feather, so I'm kind of working from there. Okay, I'm just painting plain water, and I'm only going to do one half of the feather at a time because I want to make sure that it doesn't dry before we can do our techniques. But we want this base coat, the very first layer, the wash, to be, let's see, we'll do purple, I guess. Alright, so we're going to put some purple in here, letting it follow, and I'm touching very lightly, and I can see I got some of the water outside the feather, but that's alright. Okay, I'm just very lightly moving my brush along, letting the water help take the color, and take some more color, because I want it darker at the bottom of the feather for mine. So I'll let it fade out as we go further. I'm finding that the Crayola Violet is not quite as vibrant as some of the other colors, at least in this batch. Maybe yours will work better. Alright, so I've worked my way all the way up here. So this is just our base color. We're going to build more on it. We're going to create more layers of color after this dries. But we needed to get that. Now, you can add some more color. Like maybe I want to add a little bit of blue in here because I just think it would liven it up a little. So we'll use purples and blue. They're in the same portion of the color wheel, so they work well together. Alright, and you can pull that as far as you want. But that way you've got a little bit of violet, a little bit of our blue going on. Alright, now I'm going to do the other side. So remember, we have that center piece right down the middle that I'm going to skip. I'm trying to work that water in there, just touching the tip of my brush. Whoa! There I just switched. So you see how I went over? It's not a big deal because we can fix that up later, but that's how quickly the water will follow water. So if we're that close, it can happen. Alright. So the water paint follows wherever the water touches. So as soon as I made contact, that paint crossed over. That's alright. At this stage of the painting, it's not going to hurt it. Totally workable. Alright, so I'm going to put some more purple on this side, or violet. Work it down through to the end. And again, I'm just tapping this in very lightly and brushing very lightly, letting the water do most of the work. Alright, I still want a little more of my blue. I like that blue-violet going on, so mix together. See, the blue is just much more powerful. It takes charge of the water there, where the violet just seems to be lacking this time around. Alright. So, we're going to let that just sit and dry a little bit, and while that one's drying, we're going to prep the next feather. So decide on what colors you want. If it's not going to be similar to any of the colors you're using, you may need to wash your water depending on how much, or rinse out your water container. But we can do the same thing. Work down through the center, along that center line I should say. Just water, because we're using the wet on wet technique. It gives us a nice quick fill. I like the way it fills the space and creates a soft color for the background. So this time I'm going to use some of our green. You can use other colors. It doesn't have to be the same color I'm using. Just make sure that if you use analogous colors, which are colors right next to each other on the color wheel, you won't get mud. If you use colors that are opposites, like red and green, so if they're across from each other, those are complementary colors, and if you use them together, they're going to turn muddy on you. So you have to consider that when you choose your colors. Alright, so this is covering pretty good. There we go. Alright, and I'm probably going to add some other, I don't know if I'll add yellow in with that. Yellow is one where you really need to keep your water kind of clean, otherwise, whew, makes a mess. But I'm just going to work a little bit of yellow into this feather just to see how I like it. Gives you a little bit of lime green at one end and darker green at the other. Makes me think of like a parrot. Alright, so let's do the other side. And I pulled some from the top, and that's alright. So some of that color is showing up, but I'm getting it wet, getting it ready, and this is also showing how just a tiny bit of pigment gives you that really, really light color if it's showing up on the camera. So, because I'm seeing a very, very light green right now. Okay, and then we'll do the same. Start putting my dark green down here. Just barely touching into there and moving my brush, really. Very careful, intentional paint strokes. There we go. And again, we're going to let this dry because the more detailed part will be when we paint our wet paint on dry surface. So once this is dry, we can add more layers and make it look much more dimensional, much more interesting, more textured. So right now they just look kind of flat and smooth. Alright, let's see if I can get some more yellow. Add that in here toward the top to lighten up. And you could even, sometimes it stays, sometimes it doesn't because we're still in the wet on wet, but sometimes I will try to brush it in the direction I'm looking for, to try to make it look like it's got those feathering out from the center. Alright. Looks pretty good. So we'll leave it at that for now. And we can always clean up pencil lines later if there's something that's bugging you and it's sticking out. Alright, so I've got my blues and greens and purples going on. Now, we've done cool colors, greens and blues and purple. Starting to head toward warm color when we added yellow here. So we could do this feather using warm colors just to switch it up. Alright, so I think I will. I think I'm going to use red to start it. So let me prep my background of the feather. Again, just getting it wet with water, using the wet on wet technique, staying inside those lines so that our paint will go where we want it to go. Alright. And let's go for some red. And I'm going to try darker at the bottom, some more pigment here, and then just kind of let it work its way out and start to fade as it joins with more and more water. That's my plan, because I want it darker at the base, brighter and lighter toward the top. Alright, so there's my red feather coming into being. You can see this is already lighter up here because there's more water than pigment. This area had a lot more red pigment in it. And when this dries, if you want that part to be darker, we can add more red. We can add some other colors over it, and we probably will. So we'll see that in another segment. Let's go ahead and add maybe some orange. I'll play with the orange a little bit, give it a couple different, so it's not just plain red, since we played with the other ones and gave them multiple colors to makes it a little more interesting. Alright, now I'm going to do the other side, and my water is starting to look a little muddy. So it's because we've worked with, now we're getting into those colors right here that are complements to these, so when they mix, they start to get muddy. So you may have to change your water. Now, I'm not worried about this color that came over because I'm going to use it anyway. So at least now you can see where I'm placing my water. The wet on wet technique. But because I'm only using one brush, I mean, if you have different size brushes and you've got a whole set, that's great. But I'm only using one brush because it's what I have available, and I find that you can get a lot of different looks just from using one brush. I mean, you don't have to have a whole fancy set of brushes to make beautiful art. Alright, so let's go here and get some more red. There it goes. Filling in that space, touching lightly. And I'm still brushing it along. Very careful. I kind of lift my brush a little bit when I don't want it to make a huge fat line, because there are enough bristles at the end that we can do that. Okay. Alright, looks pretty good. So there's our base colors that we need to let dry. This one's almost dry, our first one. So we might be in pretty good shape. But we'll do more details in just, well, no, we have to let that dry a little bit. And then we can go in and add more details to our feathers so they look more feather-like.